practices, pollution, runoff, and unregulated visitor pressure may continue producing value for a while, but over time, it degrades. Fish population declines, corals weaken, they're bleached. If you have gone around the country looking at various coral reefs in Sri Lanka, you will be sad to see that they're bleached, many of them. Water quality deteriorates, and tourism quality obviously falls. And coastal protection weakens. So a well-designed, a well-managed marine protected area is part of this big maintenance system of a productive asset that we have. It gives ecosystems space to recover. It protects breeding and nursery grounds for fish and other species. It allows fish populations to regenerate. It protects reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, and lagoons. It supports what scientists call a spillover effect, where healthier fish populations inside protected areas can help replenish surrounding fishing grounds. It strengthens the quality of marine tourism. It creates a platform for sustainable livelihoods, community enterprises, and nature-based investment. In other words, strong MPAs are not empty spaces. They are the productive natural infrastructure, at least part of it. Now let's take tourism for an example. Sri Lanka's tourism proposition cannot be separated from nature. We are driven by it. That's our brand. Visitors don't come here for hotel rooms. They come here for nature and experiences. The place and experience. Degraded reef is not only a biodiversity loss, it's a tourism loss. A polluted beach is not only an environmental problem, it's a brand problem. Right? These are Sri Lankan beaches. If they are dirty, they're polluted, it's a brand problem. A damaged lagoon is not a habitat issue, it's a livelihoods issue. And if Sri Lanka wants to move from volume-based tourism to higher value tourism, then the health of our coastal and marine ecosystems must become central to our thinking on competitiveness in tourism. So strong MPAs can certainly support that shift in thinking. They can help Sri Lanka offer better diving, better snorkeling, whale watching, coastal experiences, educational tourism, scientific tourism, right? Community-based tourism. These are all things that are practiced all over the world. And nature-positive hospitality, right? But this only works if protection is real. A protected area that exists only on paper will not generate any value, right? A park without enforcement, financing, visitor management, data, and community support will not protect the asset at all. And if it does not protect the asset, it cannot support the economy, because eventually the asset will deplete and destroy itself. Let's take climate resilience. Now, Sri Lanka's coastal economy is exposed to erosion, flooding, storms, saltwater intrusion, heat stress, and general ecosystems degradation. Hotels, roads, fisheries, infrastructure, ports, all these things, coastal settlements, they're all exposed due to climate resilience-related issues in the country. Now, marine and coastal ecosystems reduce some of this risk. Mangroves, they absorb wave energy. Reefs reduce coastal exposure. Seagrass stabilizes sediment, right? Wetlands filter water. So healthy ecosystems can actually reduce losses in ways that hard infrastructure alone cannot. That infrastructure, that is the infrastructure that your insurers of your companies, your lenders, the hotel owners, and local authorities can certainly understand. Right? That's the natural buffer. So strong MPAs are not just about protecting species, which we are commonly led to believe. They're about protecting assets. They're about risk management, market confidence. They're about long-term productivity of the coastal economy. So that's why I say again, strong MPAs are not costs, they are capital expenditure. We have to start thinking in that way. Now, whenever we talk about marine protection, the first question is often, how do we raise more money for this? That is always the first question. That is an important question, but in Sri Lanka's context, I would argue that is the second question. So the first question, in my view, is how do we use these assets, revenues, institutions, and partnerships that we already have more effectively? That's the first question. Because we already have revenue and institutions, and these assets are there. How do we manage them effectively? Now, across protected area systems in the world, this includes Sri Lanka as well, one recurring challenge is that revenue generated by high-value nature sites does not always return sufficiently to the site level management or enforcement or its maintenance or its visitor services, right? Now, this is not a criticism of any one agency in Sri Lanka or elsewhere. This is a design challenge. And because it is a design challenge, it's solvable. Without a feedback loop between the value generation or generated by a site and the reinvestment needed to protect that site, protected areas struggle to deliver their full ecological and economic value, right? That is the argument here. The result can be protected areas that exist legally but do not have any resources, staffing, monitoring, visitor management, or enforcement capacity to function as a productive natural infrastructure. Thank you. So in conservation language, people sometimes call these paper parks, right? Paper parks. But for a business audience like yourselves, let me put it differently, it is like owning a high-value asset and not allocating enough maintenance budget. It is like collecting revenue from a hotel and not renovating or reinvesting in your rooms for upgrades and things like that. So eventually the asset depreciates. So the solution is not necessarily more money, it is better governance. That's number one. A portion of the revenue generated from high-value marine assets, right, or sites, should flow back into the management of those very assets. So management plans, especially for marine protected areas, they should be costed, they should be funded, and enforcement of it should be funded. How many of you know whether any of our MPAs have boats to manage them? I mean, it's a marine protected area, right? You can't walk and monitor activities there, you need a boat. Do any of your MPAs have boats? I'm not sure, someone might be able to say. Very few. So data should be collected if we are serious about this, and communities should definitely benefit. Private operators like yourselves who want to invest in marine environment's health should have clear, transparent rules for participation. This is where carefully designed public-private partnerships like what you have shown in the video can really help. Other countries have shown that very well-structured partnerships where qualified operators invest in sustainable tourism, visitor services, restoration, monitoring, or community enterprise like South Africa, right? Under very, very clear conservation rules and guidelines. These models can work, and South Africa is one example. Now, they used concession models to bring private investment into selected areas while maintaining public ownership and conservation oversight. The key lesson is not that Sri Lanka borrows wholesale from South Africa or anywhere else, but the lesson is that protected areas need revenue and reinvestment models that sustains the asset. For Sri Lanka, the challenge is not asset scarcity. The challenge is institutional readiness, right? Which I believe a coalition like yourselves can really support. We have reefs, we have beaches, lagoons, mangroves, fisheries, and seascapes. We have private interest. It's very clear from this kind of forum. We have communities that have knowledge and dependence on these ecosystems. What we need is really a very clear and an effective governance architecture that allows these assets to be managed, financed, protected, and used responsibly. This is where a national blue economy strategy becomes quite essential. Sri Lanka's blue economy cannot be built vis-a-vis isolated projects. Blue economy cuts across tourism, shipping, fisheries, environment, ports, local government, planning, finance, defense, science, right? And very importantly, investment promotion. Now, each of these sectors, currently as we speak, they operate separately. We get fragmented decisions then, unclear approvals, weak enforcement, overlapping and sometimes contradictory mandates. And of course, all of this generates missed opportunities. So a national blue economy strategy can really provide the missing architecture. It can clarify priorities. It can also define what kind of blue growth Sri Lanka wants. It can identify which ecosystems must be protected, which sectors should be promoted, and which investment should be encouraged, and which practices should be phased out, right? And also how communities should benefit from the blue economy. It can also answer a question that investors ask a lot, that is, what is the pipeline, right? Where are the bankable projects? Where are the rules, the standards, and the data? Where is the coordination? Who is going to do that? Right? We need clarity in all of these. So at the heart of such a strategy should be marine spatial planning. Now, marine spatial planning sounds very technical, right? Maybe some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't. But its economic purpose is simple. It creates clarity. It helps answer what should happen here and what should happen there, right? Under what conditions, with what safeguards and standards, right? It gives you clarity. And for business, this matters because uncertainty is expensive in business. Unclear rules raise costs. Fragmented approvals delay investments. Why do you think Sri Lanka is slow to attract investment? For all these reasons. I'm sure Professor Sirumal can tell you thousands of stories about these things. Weak data, right, increases risk. Because many of them, they're not coming blindly to invest in Sri Lanka. They do their math, their risk calculations very thoroughly. And unresolved conflicts in our seascapes and on land, they reduce confidence among investors. So marine spatial planning can reduce these transaction costs. It can improve predictability. It can bring data into decision making. It can also align conservation priorities with economic priorities. It can help government and business move from this kind of ad hoc, haphazard decision making into a planned investment landscape. That is why strong MPAs need strong spatial planning around them as well. Because MPAs, they are not islands of protection, right, in a sea of mismanagement. They cannot be that. MPAs matter, the marine protected areas matter, but the system around them matter just as much, right? Now let me come to finance. Conservation does require capital, it requires money, but we should not think of marine protection as a permanent fiscal burden. If designed well, it can become part of a financing system that pays for itself over time through the value that it helps create over and over again because of its regenerative nature. There are 4 practical layers to think about when we think of finance. First, I think we need better reinvestment of existing revenue. Where marine coastal assets generate tourism or visitor revenue, a clear portion of it should be reinvested in the management of those very assets. This creates a feedback loop that I mentioned earlier. Nature generates value, a portion of that value then should return to nature management. The better management improves the asset, and a better asset generates more value. That's the logic, right? This is basic asset management for those of you who are in finance. Second, we need blended finance and public-private partnerships. Globally, new models are emerging where MPAs are co-managed with government and supported by reef-positive businesses. And these could be sustainable tourism, community aquaculture, traceable fisheries, restoration systems, and conservation-linked enterprises. The lesson is simple. Conservation can be financed partly through commercial value. That makes it possible, right? But this requires very strong contracts, transparent rules, measurable outcomes, and community benefit sharing. These are kind of like the principles that we must follow if we are going to go for this kind of models. Third finance-related point is that we need to use blue carbon and nature finance more strategically. Mangroves, seagrasses, salt marshes, the mudflats, and other coastal ecosystems, they store carbon and they protect our coastlines. They can also support fisheries and livelihoods. Now, Sri Lanka already has biodiversity and restoration commitments that can be translated into credible blue carbon coastal resilience pipelines, right? But again, finance will not flow just because something is called blue, right? It won't just automatically come. Finance follows with credible governance. It follows data, measurement, and safeguards. Finance follows trust, right, and predictability. The fourth point I want to make on finance is that we need to position Sri Lanka for concessional climate and nature finance. The global direction is very clear. Biodiversity, the global biodiversity frameworks, the 30 by 30 agenda, and the new ocean finance mechanisms are moving capital toward countries that can show credible marine governance. So Sri Lanka should not enter these conversations as a passive recipient of global norms, not at all. We should enter them as a serious island economy with a serious blue economy strategy. Right? This means we need investable pipelines, not scattered projects. We need bankable propositions. We need measurable outcomes and not broad aspirations, which sometimes tend to dictate some of these discussions, I'm afraid. We need to show that marine protection is part of our national economic strategy and part of our national interest. Now let me speak directly to the private sector in the room. Now your role in this agenda is not simply corporate social responsibility, right? I mean, CSR is good, it has its place. Beach cleanups, they have their place, they're good. Awareness campaigns have their place. All of these are good things, but blue economy requires something deeper. It requires business models that internalize sustainability. It requires investment in restoration and resilience. It requires traceability in supply chains. It also requires tourism models that respect carrying capacity and seafood value chains that reward sustainable practices. So this means that it requires exporters, bankers, hotels, insurers, logistics firms, and investors to see nature risk as business risk. If you depend on coastal and marine assets for your business, then the health of those assets is part of your risk calculation, is part of your business model. It should be. So a hotel chain that depends on beach quality has an interest in reef health, should, on waste management, as you have shown, on coastal planning, and also community livelihoods. A bank financing coastal infrastructure has an interest in climate risk, erosion, flooding, all of these things, and also future regulatory standards. An insurance company has an interest in natural buffers that reduce losses. And a company with ESG commitments should have an interest in credible, measurable, and locally beneficial conservation partnerships, right? So the private sector should not only ask what restrictions will MPAs impose, rather they should ask what value can strong MPAs unlock, right? That's the question. And the value does not emerge automatically, not at all. It requires a new compact between government, businesses, and communities. Now, government must provide clear rules of the game, predictable regulations, credible data, fair enforcement, clear approvals, reinvestment mechanisms, and coordinated planning. That's what governments must provide. We should expect that from them. Then businesses must bring capital, your innovation, your standards, your market access, and a willingness to invest in the ecosystems that you depend on for your business. And then communities must be treated not as beneficiaries at the end of a process, but as co-managers, like we saw on the video, right? They are knowledge holders and rights holders and entrepreneurs, so they should be treated as such. This last point is very critical, because a blue economy that excludes coastal communities will not be socially durable. You will not be able to do business for too long if you do not engage the communities, right? Time and again we have seen this in evidence. A conservation model that imposes costs locally while benefits accrue somewhere else will not be politically sustainable. And a business model that treats communities only as labor rather than partners will not create inclusive growth. So strong marine ecosystems will only work when ecological integrity is there, but also business value and community benefits reinforce each other.